application of the INQUIRE data tools. Today's webinar is being conducted on behalf of the Office of Planning, Research, and Evaluation in the Administration for Children and Families. And in just a moment, I'll introduce Ivelisse Martinez-Beck, who is our co-host for the webinar. She's the Federal Project Officer for INQUIRE and the Data Tools project that's being carried out through a contract with Child Trends. She'll provide some brief information about OPRE's support of the Data Tools project and how it fits into the research and evaluation work that OPRE oversees. Meg, can you advance? So I know that we have many of you on the call today and quite a diverse audience for our webinar. And as we looked across the range of different job titles and the locations, the different organizations that you represent, we felt that it really reflected the many ways in which we are interacting and relying upon data in our work. Today in our call, we have state child care, subsidy, and early learning administrators. We have researchers and evaluators. We have data managers. We have technical assistance specialists, grant writers and coordinators, quality assurance specialists, and operations directors, as well as many other job titles and perspectives on the webinar. So we are just thrilled that you've joined us today and looking forward to the conversation with you. As you remember, when you registered for the webinar, we asked you about what is the primary early childhood data challenge you face. And we know that with the diverse roles you play and the different ways that you use the data, we would see some different challenges being reported. And as you can see from the graph on the screen, we saw not one singular challenge that you face, though of course all of these are interrelated. You can see the largest response was that many of you felt that developing an integrated data system was your primary challenge. Another quarter of you felt that accessing data to answer policy questions is the main challenge you're facing in your work. About a fifth of you said that ensuring data quality is one of your primary challenges. And then fewer, about 12%, who said that knowing what data to collect is a primary challenge. And then also funding an integrated data system is a challenge for you. So we appreciate the responses, and we know that we have a diverse audience facing different challenges, so hopefully our webinar today can be tailored to some of your different needs, and we can show you how the INQUIRE data tools can help with the different challenges that you're facing in your state. So given those different challenges, the purpose of our webinar series that we've developed is to provide practical tools and guidance that can support your work in designing, linking, reporting, analyzing, and acting upon data. We're going to be talking about a set of tools. In this slide, I'll just give you a brief introduction to the different tools, but you'll hear much more about these as we proceed through our presentation today. You'll learn about a set of data elements and definitions that have been developed to support your work. You'll see an example of a data matrix that we've developed that can facilitate sorting and selection of data elements. And most importantly for many of you, we will provide a guidance document that provides information about key policy, research, and monitoring questions and shows you how to link those questions to data elements and provide some analytic instructions on how those key policy, research, and monitoring questions can be addressed. So our agenda is that we'll first provide some background and context for the data tools. We'll then turn to a more in-depth overview of the data tools. Then you'll be able to hear state perspectives and applications. So we have presenters from Vermont and California who will tell you about the work that they're doing and how the tools will be helpful to their work. We'll provide some next steps, and then we'll offer some time for answering your questions and having a little discussion among the panelists. So At this point, I'm very pleased to introduce Ivelisse Martinez-Beck from OPRE, who's going to tell you a little bit more about what INQUIRE is and the work that OPRE is doing to support data.
Thank you, Catherine. Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us in the first of a series of webinars on data, tools, and information for developing early childhood data systems. My name is Ivelisse Martinez-Beck, and I am the Child Care Research Team Leader in the Office of Planning, Research, and Evaluation, where I oversee child care policy research and other early childhood projects. I wanted to give you a little bit of context about the INQUIRE Consortium. The Quality Initiatives Research and Evaluation Consortium is a consortium of researchers and evaluators who are working on projects related to QIRS and other quality improvement and initiatives or topics. And the purpose of the group is to support high-quality, policy-relevant research and evaluation, as well as to provide guidance to policymakers on evaluation strategies, new research, interpretation of research results, and implications of new research for practice. Just to give you a little bit of context on INQUIRE, on April 2008, the Office of Planning, Research, and Evaluation, in collaboration with some other federal partners and other stakeholders, hosted a meeting of teams from 9 states that included state administrators, researchers, and evaluators to talk about some of the challenges states were having, both on designing, implementing, and also on conducting research and evaluation on the new systems that were putting in place as quality rating and improvement systems. From that meeting, we got some very good guidance about the types of support that federal agencies could give states and stakeholders to try to do quality QIRS and also conduct research and evaluation activities. And the key things that that group told us was that they wanted to have a forum for dissemination of information and sharing of best practices in research and evaluation, as well as conduct some key activities to really elucidate some of the topics that were still in very infancy of research and evaluation. From that meeting, there were several things that OPRE took very seriously, and first, it supported the development of this consortium, INQUIRE, and also awarded several new projects that resulted in the QIRS compendium that many of you may be familiar with, some multi-case studies of QIRS assessing issues related to quality measurement and QIRS as a systems builder, as well as a toolkit for research and evaluation. INQUIRE has been going on since then. It's a very, very active and large group of researchers and evaluators working with states. And we have been focusing on many topics, including quality measurement, construction and validation of QIRS, reliability and training requirements for quality measurement, and other topics, including the topic that we're going to be talking about today, which is the development of data elements for QIRS and quality initiatives that have resulted in the tools that my colleagues are going to describe for you today. So I hope that you send us many questions and that you find these resources useful for your work, and we'll be happy to answer questions at the end of the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ivelisse. This is Catherine Taut again, and just to build on what Ivelisse just mentioned about the variety of projects that OPRE has funded, and to give you a little sense of the background of how the data elements work started, I wanted to just describe a little bit more about the quality rating assessment project that Ivelisse mentioned. Through that work, and also through the work that many of the INQUIRE members are doing in state QRIS evaluations, we heard from states and evaluators about the need for support on data. And of course, as you know, this was not just for the purposes of conducting research and evaluation, but also for these very pressing needs of reporting to federal agencies, reporting to funders, and reporting to other stakeholders, and for performance management and monitoring, and knowing what the systems are producing in the states that you're working in and how well the work is being done. But we heard that not only we needed to think about data for a variety of purposes, but also that there was a need for guidance on what data to collect and at what level. So for example, in a quality rating and improvement system for early care and education, there's a need to think about how much data to collect, how much to store over time, and how that different data can be used. We also heard very loud and clear from other stakeholders that if we are going to think about providing support on data, that it was extremely important to coordinate with other data initiatives and with the variety of reporting requirements that states have and that evaluators contribute data to supporting, and that it was very important not to duplicate efforts and to provide information that could really align with other requirements that states have. So just some more specific background, INQUIRE Data Elements Workgroup began in the spring of 2012, last year, and began thinking about how to take this need and create a practical set of tools that could be used. And we started with this purpose really thinking about how to, first of all, have a set of common data elements that can guide data collection efforts, and using some common language and some common coding so that when we talk about quality rating and improvement systems as one example and talk about the data that we're collecting, we can begin to think perhaps about some common language and beginning to look at apples to apples across states. But we also know that, of course, that common language is important within states as well, and that the guidance on how to set up data elements and data systems would be very helpful. So that was one purpose. But the second, and even a larger and more important purpose from the perspective of many of you on the call, is that we wanted to make sure that the data elements that were recommended could be linked back to those important questions that inform monitoring, reporting, performance management, and evaluation. And then building on what we heard from evaluators working in states, from state administrators looking at data in their states, we knew that we needed to also provide some guidance on data governance and data integrity. And those will be the topics of future webinars, as we'll talk about towards the end of this presentation. So as I mentioned, our process was to work with a very small group that was part of INQUIRE, but also to make sure that our efforts were being aligned with other national data collection efforts and reporting. One of the most important partnerships that was formed during this work for the INQUIRE Data Workgroup is that we formed a partnership with the Common Education Data Standards. And many of you will know about the Common Education Data Standards. It's a national collaborative effort to develop voluntary common data standards for a key set of education data elements for early learning through post-secondary and the workforce. So for many of us in INQUIRE, coming from an early learning and early childhood background, to be honest, the Common Education Data Standards were new to many of us. So we realized that this partnership that INQUIRE could build between some more of the early childhood field and the Common Education Data Standards field, and to support that work on the early learning data elements would be a really fantastic partnership. So we worked closely with the CEDS Early Learning Quality Group. The early learning data elements do have a variety of other work groups, but we worked closely with the quality group. And when the INQUIRE group had developed a set of potential data elements on early learning quality, we shared those with the Common Education Data Standards, and those were submitted out last fall for public review. A variety of the data elements that were suggested in the INQUIRE data elements set were not ready yet for the early learning quality group, and some of those will appear in the next version of the Common Education Data Standards. So one important thing that we have done in the tools is to be very clear in our tools when we have elements that come directly from the Common Education Data Standards, and many of them do, and when there are standards in the INQUIRE data elements that do not overlap, although they may overlap in the future, and that will be an important point of coordination and alignment as the next version of the Common Education Data Standards is released. So in addition to working closely with the Common Education Data Standards, we also coordinated the production of the data elements with other national efforts and experts. And these include the Early Childhood Data Collaborative, the National Registry Alliance, as well as the National Early Care and Education Survey. Many of you may not know about this survey. It is a survey of households and programs in the United States, and when we could, we've attempted to use fields that come directly from that survey or to indicate when a data element is similar to a field from that survey, so that as you hear about the really exciting results that will be coming out from that survey next year, you'll be able to align and understand where those fields are in your own data systems that might align with those in the National Early Care and Education Survey. We also worked really closely to make sure that the data elements that were recommended were aligned with federal reporting. And again, because of our focus coming out of an early learning, early childhood focus, we focused heavily on reporting that is closely linked to child care and to early learning. So you can see here that we looked at the ACF 801 case level reporting form. We looked at the Quality Performance Report, which is a report for the Child Care and Development Fund. We looked at the Head Start Program Information Report, and we looked at the performance measures for the Early Learning Challenge Grant. So to the extent possible, we have aligned the data elements in the INQUIRE data tools with the reporting requirements for these federal reports, and have made it possible for you to identify where particular data elements can inform the federal reporting for each of those. So with that background, I'd like to now go into more depth. I hope that gives you a brief overview, but now you'll hear much more in depth about the different tools. And we, as I mentioned, have a variety of presenters. First, from Child Trends, we have my colleagues Carlise King, who is the Data and Technical Assistance Director, and Sarah Friese, who's a Senior Research Analyst. Once Carlise and Sarah provide some background on the tools, we'll turn it over to Kathleen Patterson from Vermont, and she'll talk about the Building Bright Futures, Vermont's Early Childhood Data Reporting System project. And then we'll also hear from Sarah Neville Morgan in California, who will talk about some of the early work that's happening in California. And Cecilia Fisher-Doms may or may not be able to join us, but Sarah will keep us posted as we get to that point in the webinar about Cecilia's availability. But we're really looking forward, especially to having Kathleen and Sarah provide some examples of how the data tools that you'll hear about from Carlise and Sarah can really be brought to life and work in the realities of your systems. So I would turn it over to Carlise.
Hello, thank you, Catherine. As Catherine mentioned, my name is Carlise King, and I am the Data and Technical Assistance Director here at Child Trends. So for my portion of the presentation, I'm going to be reviewing with you the data dictionary and the data elements matrix. And after that, Sarah Friese will go over with you how these data elements link to the policy questions that we've identified. The audience that we envision for these tools have really been state administrators, data specialists, researchers, and also technical assistance specialists. I think it's important as I go through the data elements to point out that the data dictionary isn't necessarily meant to be exhaustive, but really a beginning guide to outline data elements that are needed to describe your early childhood system, and then to also answer key policy questions that you may have. So for the rest of the presentation, we're going to be going over the data dictionary, the data matrix, and linking to the policy questions. So for the data dictionary and the data matrix, they're organized by level, and then within each of the levels, there are specific categories to organize the data elements for each of those areas. And so currently, the levels that we've outlined are data elements that would be collected by child, family, program, class or group, and then by practitioner. For the categories, all right, thank you very much. So as I was saying, for the data dictionary and the data matrix, they're organized by level, and within each level, there are specific categories based on the type of information that was collected for that particular group. So for across all of the categories, across all of the levels, there are similar categories such as ID. So for each group, there are specific data fields that allow you to identify the unique children, families, programs, classrooms, and practitioners that live within your data sets. However, for the practitioner level, you'll find that there are specific categories related to professional development and work experience that are needed to be collected at that level. So I will be reviewing with you for each of the levels, the different categories, just so, there's about 200 or so data elements included, but we wanted to give you an opportunity to see at what level the information is organized and then the areas and categories that we're collecting. And then for each level, there are examples of the data elements, so that it'll give you a sense of how the data dictionary and the matrix are organized and the type of information that's included. So first, I'm going to start with the child level information. So for all of the child data elements that are included in the data dictionary, they're organized by these 4 categories. So child identification, their demographics, what child screening and assessments that child may have received, and then information about their early care and education experiences. So for example, for the child ID, we also include a field that designates how that child ID was developed. I think it's important to note within the data dictionary, we don't necessarily give specific guidance on what you should be using for that ID, but noting that it's important that you have a unique ID for the level of information that you're collecting, and that it's clear how that ID was selected. So we know for some states they may use a school district to develop that code, a child's birth certificate, or have their own unique ID that's generated. But we also note that the system of identification is important in tracking so that you know for each of the different systems how that ID was generated. On the next screen, I'll be going over the family level information. And so for family level, we include information to identify the individual families, household level information. So for example, income level, and this is an example of a definition that aligns with what the Common Education Data Elements includes for SEDS. And then also parent survey information. So as we were developing the policy questions, specifically questions related to parents' decision-making, we realized that, one, not all of these data elements may live in one system, and then also that not necessarily all of these data elements are going to be able to be collected from an administrative data system. So when possible in the analysis, that's noted, but for example, we have under family, a lot of this information is information you may gather through a parent survey. And so that's its own separate category, and data elements are listed within that. For the next level, for program, we have several categories of information which we collect on the individual programs. Again, identification, the ages that are served, information about licensing and accreditation for that particular program, information specific to program management and workforce policies. And so, for example, under program management, information around year schedule is the example that we have here, but also staff ratios, schedules of care that may be offered for children that attend that particular program. For licensing, it would include information on monitoring and visits that that program had received. On the next slide, we have 3 additional categories for program level information, which include funding and subsidy that program receives, information about their participation in their state's quality improvement system. There are multiple data elements within the QRIS that also first identifies whether or not your state has a QRIS system, and if your state does have a QRIS system, what has been the level of participation for this particular program. We've also included information on parent knowledge and involvement and activities that that particular program might participate in that involves parent engagement activities. On the next slide, next 2 slides, I'll be going over the practitioner level information. I would say this is our largest section that we have in here. And similar to the other ones, we have demographic and identification information, but then also including data elements that are related to the practitioner's education, employment history, training, any credentials, or, for example, if they have a child development associate credential, what type that is, any professional, their education level. We also, on the next slide, I'm sorry, go back one. Collect information about the provider's professional development. So in here we outline tracking of training and professional activity that practitioner may have participated in. Again, this would be an example of information that if your state has a workforce registry, that may be where this information lives. Or if you are an organization that provides training and professional development, this may be information that you're collecting at a program level on the training that you provide and that practitioners are participating with. So again, depending on your role and the type of information you're collecting, you may be applying this in different ways. And then also we have a separate category on practitioners' work experience to get a sense of, for the employment information, it's really specific information tracking their start and stop at specific programs and their employment history. These are fields that look at their overall experience working in the early care and education field. And then for our last level is the classroom or group level. And again, here we have, you want to make sure that you have an ID to identify that specific classroom, and then also information about the program structure. So in here, the example that we give is whether assessments are aligned with early learning guidelines for that particular classroom. We also have information about data elements that cover the type of curriculum that may be used in a particular classroom. For the quality measures, what was really kind of key about this particular data element is to ensure whatever quality measure that you're collecting, that you include the date that that element was administered, the actual score, and the reliability associated with that. Next, so those are all of the data element levels and categories within each of the levels. The next tool that has the same data elements laid out in the same level and categories that I just described is our data matrix. And there are two primary differences between the two different products. The data dictionary is a Word document, and that includes the data, the definition, the format, the codes that can be utilized. The data matrix includes that as well. However, it's in an Excel format, as Catherine was mentioning, which we would hope gives users more of an ability to search and to filter by the different levels and categories that they're interested in looking at. And then this also includes the crosswalk that Catherine described. And so on here you'll see that we have, for example, they're abbreviated here, but the quality performance report. And so within the data matrix you'll see a yes if this is a field that's also collected or aligned with that particular data collection effort, and a no if it's not. It's good to be clear that not necessarily everything, for example, for the 801 reporting, every data element needed for that report is here, but whenever a data element overlapped with reporting for any of these national reporting and data collection efforts, we noted that within the data matrix. And so this would be another field that you would be able to search on and sort by. So next I am going to hand over the presentation to my colleague Sarah Friese to go over the policy questions, and so that you can then next see how these data elements link to that process.
Thank you, Carlise. So Carlise just showed you some examples of the many data elements that we have both in the data dictionary and in the data matrix. And when you see these full tools, you realize that actually the number of data elements is in the hundreds. So we have quite a few data elements. And when we were thinking about how we could create a useful set of tools to apply those data elements in a way that would be helpful to states, we took the lead of the SEDS and developed a series of policy questions that could be answered using data elements. So we developed our own set of early learning policy questions that are related to the data elements. And our questions can kind of generally be broken down into three types: monitoring or tracking, policy, and then research. So each of these groups of questions are not mutually exclusive, but they can kind of loosely be grouped as such. So just to give you an example of what a monitoring question might be, one of our questions is, what are the characteristics of practitioners working in early care and education programs? An example policy question might be, do targeted populations with high needs have access to high quality care? And a possible research question might be, do the developmental outcomes, whether they be cognitive, social, emotional, or physical, among children improve over time? So as Carlise had talked about, just as with the data elements, our research and policy and monitoring questions are organized by subject. So those subjects, as you might remember, are child, practitioner, family, classroom, or program. In addition to that, we've also developed a series of questions that are specific to QRIS, and those questions take more of a systems level approach to addressing the effectiveness of the entire child care system in the state. So on the next slide, you can sort of see that these questions kind of have a really wide span of what they're addressing. So the monitoring and tracking questions, like the question that I mentioned earlier, what are the characteristics of practitioners, those are mostly descriptive, and as such there's really a large number of data elements that could be used from our data matrix or the data dictionary to really understand what's going on with an ECE workforce in the state. To give you an idea of what types of elements are listed for this question in our data dictionary and matrix, there are elements related to education, so about a practitioner's degrees or their certifications, their position, their employment start dates and end dates, what type of position they hold, training, compensation, demographics, and then a number of other elements too. And so for these tracking or monitoring questions, we don't provide much in the way of analysis recommendations because the analyses that you would be doing would be specific to your state and mostly descriptive. But on the next slide, we have a question that's more of a policy question, and that question is, do targeted populations with high needs have access to high quality care? And on the slide, you can see that we list the data elements from our matrix that you would need to answer that question. So we have some child level elements, some family elements, and some program elements. In the way that you would connect these elements to the matrix is that we'll provide you with an ID in the questions, and that ID will also be in the matrix too, so that you'll be able to look in the matrix or the data dictionary to get more information about each of these elements. So answering this question about whether targeted populations with high needs have access to high quality care involves answering 3 sub-questions first, and that's on the next slide here. And those 3 sub-questions are: what percentage of the children in the state meet the criteria for high needs? How many high needs children are receiving care from programs participating in the state's QRS? And how many high needs children are receiving the highest quality care from programs participating in the state's QRS as defined by the state? So an example of our analysis recommendation is for the sub-question, how many high needs children are participating in the state's QRS? And on this next slide here, you can kind of get a sense of the type of recommendations that we'll be doing. So this would be in the analysis recommendations for that policy question. And then in addition to that, you would see more recommendations for the other 2 questions, and then a recommendation that really pulls all 3 of those questions together. And reading through this, you can kind of see where we have highlighted the specific data element that you would need to pull from, and what you would need to do to transform or combine that with other data elements to really get at that question. So the next slide gives you just kind of another example of this, and the question is, does workforce stability increase from year to year? And you can see the data elements that you would need to answer that question. So we have some practitioner elements and some program elements. Like I mentioned before, you could go to the data dictionary or the data matrix to look up these elements and get really a lot more information about how they're defined, what option sets we would recommend that you use for them, and that extra type of really specific information. So on the next slide, we see that this question is very similar to the previous question, in which a series of sub-questions need to be answered first to really get at workforce stability. And the next slide gives you the actual analysis recommendations for just one piece of that. And this, in this analysis recommendation, we're actually the full one. We provide recommendations on practitioners or calculating workforce stability by practitioner and also by program. This slide is specific to calculating by practitioner. It's very similar to the last one, in which we name the actual data element and then provide guidance about how to take those data elements, transform them to answer the question. This is just an example. As with the other question, the full analysis recommendation would involve working through all 3 of the questions and then combining those together to really get at that main question, which is determining workforce stability. And I should also mention, too, that while we're presenting here tools that are Word tools and Excel files, we're really envisioning that long-term we'll be moving towards a more web-enabled format for these tools, so that you could use the documents that we are presenting here, but also that you could use a website to really filter down, identify elements that really are specific to your state, whether they be reporting requirements. If you want to look at just the child requirements too, we're hoping that that web tool will make a lot of those filtering and selection decisions much easier. And so now I'd like to turn the presentation over to our next set of presenters, who will be discussing how they would use some of these tools in their states. So the data tools that we've developed don't really provide specific information about implementation, because we sort of understand that depending on your needs and where you are in the process of assessing your current data collection, whether you're representing a state or you're providing technical assistance to a state, these tools could really be applied in a lot of different ways. So first, we're going to hear from Kathleen Patterson from Building Bright Futures in Vermont, and she will discuss Vermont's Early Childhood Data Reporting System project and how they're using policy questions to guide their data collection. And then after that, Sarah Neville Morgan from California's Child Care Development Division will discuss California's need for data standardization and how the data dictionary could facilitate this planning and discussion process. So I'd like to thank them both for joining us on the webinar and turn it over to Kathleen.
Great. Thank you, Sarah, so much. Sarah, I just want to do a check-in to see if I'm coming through okay as far as loudness and clarity. I'm assuming you'll tell me otherwise. Good afternoon, everybody. As Sarah said, my name is Kathleen Eaton Patterson, and I'm working on a project in Vermont called the Early Childhood Data Reporting System, which is sponsored by Building Bright Futures, which is Vermont's Early Childhood State Advisory Council. And so what I'd like to do is just jump right into the next slide, Meg, and what I'd like to give you a sense of our project first is that we've been at this for several years now, and when I learned about the tools from Carlise and Catherine and Ivelisse and Sarah, I was just so pleased. These are going to be very, very helpful tools, and I do wish we had them 2 years ago, but there's still many aspects already that you've described today that are going to be beneficial to where we are. We actually have a data system prototype up and running, and our end goals for that data system is really about it being comprehensive, meaning that it covers all aspects of children's lives, that it's longitudinal, so it starts in the prenatal year, and we certainly are defining going out to the early years in school, but we're also looking at that longitudinal aspect with the K-12 work that's going on in education, and so as young adolescents graduate through high school. So we're looking at that longitudinal view. And ecological, meaning, as you all know, that the family and context of community and your state and where families, neighborhoods, where they live, that's, you know, critical to their well-being. The second part of end goal for our project is about continued improvement and results accountability, which has already been mentioned. The last bullet for an end goal is that we've been really trying to work with this prototype, a really rapid, iterative process to build out a data system where we're using appreciative inquiry with our end users. And we also are looking at it from a collective impact perspective, so bringing, as early childhood councils do, bringing the whole system together and look at all stakeholders and how they can collectively influence the well-being of young children. So that said, the next question, an obvious one, is who are the end users? And the very broad sweep is that it's our policymakers, our practitioners, and our parents. And we did start with policy questions. This was about 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago. We received an NGA Technical Assistance Award, and got involved with the national group, the Early Childhood Data Collaborative, Carlise and others. And we started off with a very broad question, is how are Vermont's children and families, how are they faring? And we then broke down into a number of questions, which I'll describe later. But we also have moved into where are the bright spots and where are the gaps in our children's health, learning, and achievement. Again, these are very common language to you all on the call, I'm sure. The last bullet is just about our project is about bringing this data system that can collect information, acquire information from a broad range of places, and we also obviously want to use that data and turn it into positive action for young children through collective and collaborative efforts. So the next slide, Meg, will jump into our process from policy questions to prototype, and this gets a little bit into the presentation so far and how these tools will really help us. When we started our effort, we thought that the policy questions that were on the table were were focused on a very important sector, the early care and education sector. We broadened it because we'd already been working on building a complete comprehensive system view. So we broadened our policy questions to include children's health, mental health, early intervention, family support, and you get the sense. We broadened it out to the whole early childhood system. So we started there, and you can see that first bullet on the slide. So we ended up with a stakeholder process and came up with 11 policy questions. What we did next was we spent the time with groups, stakeholders, small groups across the state, and we unpacked each policy question And basically, we identified the data elements that were necessary to answer the question. So exactly what we've been talking about so far, from policy questions, data matrix, and data dictionary. So we did that work, and what we made sure that we did do was to say that we would look for data elements whether we knew we had them or not. So it was a very open process, meaning that we may certainly know that we didn't collect a data element, but we were going to include it in our unpacking process. So then what we found was, now what next? We had we had the beginnings of our data dictionary, data matrix, and policy questions, but we were really trying to come up with a process that would engage the stakeholders, key decision makers, as well as parents and practitioners, to say, on paper this is what it likes, but what does it look like when you touch this? So we developed a prototype using one policy question, and that policy question was, is the quality of early childhood programs improving? It was a pretty straightforward question, but it's pretty broad. We then got into a sub-policy question and said the low-hanging fruit, the data we can go after to build this prototype, would be around our care and education, our regulated care and education. And our child care administrator for Vermont, Reva Murphy, and her staff were very eager and very supportive of helping us build out this prototype. So we then stepped into a process of, Meg can show you down the bottom there, the 3 bullets, of acquiring that data, a big data set, through a data sharing agreement. We designed and tested out a web-based system with our end users, and that process then led to a data catalog where we're mapping our data and where the gaps are. So Meg, I think maybe just to show the folks on the webinar what our system looks like. It's still a prototype with real current data in there, but again, it's a prototype. What we've done is, you'll see on the front page here is Meg has gone right into our system, and you'll see that on the right-hand side, don't go there yet, Meg, but there's access data via policy searches. That's our entree into the policy questions. If you look to the left, we've actually got in buckets of domains, really, if you want to say, of indicators. So we've looked at it through 2 lenses, but we're going to focus in on the policy searches. Meg, if you could just click on policy searches, and that will just take a few minutes to spin and get into the system. And then, Meg, if you could just drop down and show the participants the menu. It's a little bit small on everyone's screen, but those are the 11 policy questions. What we did, the only one that's actually live and active, Meg, if you could go down, is the question, is the quality of early childhood programs improving? So we clicked on, if you click on that, Meg, then it walks into, and we'll find the data sets that are related to that sub-policy. We actually came up, and here's the sub-policy question, is the quality of regulated care and education programs improving? So we're going to click on that one, Meg. We're just going to go one quick step. We're going to find the data sets there, Meg. Just click on, right up on top, Meg. Yeah, right underneath the drop-down. Sorry, Meg. That's okay. One more step would have brought you to the actual find the data sets, Meg, right there. Yeah, great, Meg. Thank you so much. So basically what happens here, and we're not going to go any further, Meg, is the end user can search by town or county or different geographies. We gave them a flavor and different ranges, and they can get data in tabular, mapping, or chart views. So that was our idea of kind of testing out this prototype and the data elements to answer that question. Meg, we're going to go back to the front end again, so the cookie crumb will bring you right back there, Meg, to the home. Yeah. So we did that, and then what we realized was we weren't able to show the audience of our stakeholders that we had really worked on 11 policy questions. So we built out a data catalog, and Meg, we'll go right up there, Meg. And if you click on that, we decided to do what you all have been doing with Catherine and Ivelisse and Sarah, that great work around the data matrix, is we identified the policy questions, Meg. We'll go there, and this is just a really an expandable sort of search engine. And you have all the questions, and we're going to go, Meg, right to the is the quality of early childhood programs improving, and click on there. We're going to click on our sub-policy question. So behind all that, we have these data elements and data files. Meg, we're going to click on the data set, data files, just expand that. And the audience can then see these are the data sets that it was mentioned earlier by Carlise that there's a data set has a number of different places where it brings files in. This is our files for this data set that answers, is the quality of programs improving? We do have, for example, if you expand the first one, Meg, the regulated care and education. So these are the data elements that we have. And if you click on, Meg, let's just go to STARS tier level. It's at the bottom of that list. And then we have this data catalog behind the scenes, so you could find what's the definition, what's the source, who's the data steward, and do we have a data sharing agreement. Meg, you can just scroll down a little bit and go to the parent engagement, and you'll see that we don't have that data, and you can see we've named the data element, but we don't actually collect that information, so it's a data gap. So that's just an example of how we've been building out the concepts that we're so delighted to see INQUIRE work on, and there's so many other aspects. And Meg, we'll just go to the home screen. We're pretty much done with that, showing you the system. And what I've seen, you know, Catherine, you're asking, and Carlise and Ivelisse, how these tools will be useful to our work. And I think that they just really support the work that we have done, but it also brings out some really key things like the crosswalk that you mentioned, the data matrix, is so critical. And so that's something that I can see us really picking up on that effort. And then I think the sub-policy questions or sub-questions that you mentioned and the analysis recommendations, that's a huge resource for us as a state, and that's going to just immediately help us dig down into how we display our data, how we answer questions, how we get folks to use the data that we have and build out beyond that. So just the last slide, Meg, is just basically who we are, and just want to thank the opportunity to share this with you all. If you have any questions, I'm sure this information can go to the audience. If the last slide, Meg, is I'm not sure if you have it available, but it's just our email addresses, and the Executive Director of Building Bright Futures is Julie Coffey, and we have a data and evaluation committee that guides the work of this project, and we're pretty excited to see what's going on with the work here presented today in the next webinar. So thank you, and maybe later there'll be questions, and we're going to lead into California.
All right, so this is Sarah Neville-Morgan with California, and all I can say, Kathleen, is now that we're all sitting here drooling over your system and completely jealous of Vermont, we've decided that California was asked to present because we show the opposite end of the spectrum. So starting with ours, I really think that we were asked to present because we've been begging for common data elements for the past year, and we're so persistent in messaging that Catherine Couch said that anytime she talked to somebody about it, they would say, oh, have you talked to California? We hear California really wants this. So at least we had consistency in our TA messaging around this. But as you all know, California is an extremely large and diverse state. We have many partners, many different agencies at both the state and local level, and multiple different initiatives. So not only do we have the federal and local and state funding sources, we also had a proposition about, now I'm trying to think back, 12 years ago? In 98, so even more than that, for Proposition 10 that created a 0 to 5 funding stream called Proposition 10, and now every county has a funding stream dedicated to that. We have 2.6 million children, 0 to 5 in our state, so when you think of the data needs, it gets really intense, I would say, when we look at that. Our direct need came from the Race to the Top Early Learning Challenge grant, and California's model put forth 17 regional leadership consortia in 16 counties that would be operating local quality rating and improvement systems. They would have and do have 3 common tiers across them, but all of the data and the implementation is happening locally in those 16 counties. Because of that, you can see the need for a common data element, definitions for them being very clear, really rose to the top. And we were sitting in the grantee meeting last year in April when they said, oh, by the way, if there's sort of a national evaluation or anything federally that we do on Race to the Top, all of you will be participating. And we just thought, oh my goodness, we have got to get common data elements out to our consortia so that we're all collecting apples to apples and everything looks the same. So we really did request guidance, as well as our consortia requesting guidance on what to collect, on the definitions behind the data elements to ensure consistency in the data collection. And I will say a lot of lessons learned over the past years around other California initiatives and projects, where if you're not collecting the same information, then it is impossible to demonstrate the impact and really message the results from that investment. And so you can see as you go back to the legislature and other funders to try and say what the impact of those investments were, when you can't say them, it really puts that project in jeopardy. When we were looking through, this is the next slide, what common data elements will support, we really thought of three big sort of key bucket areas. That first, it would really help with our QRIS data fields and really support early learning, other projects and initiatives around coordination and alignment. So when we're thinking of aligning across state agencies, but also then all of the local agencies that are involved, that coordination and alignment is key. We also thought around evaluation needs. As I was saying a little bit earlier, having common data elements and data collected is key to have a strong evaluation. And then also around policy development. So how can we use some of the tools that are coming out of this and the data that we'll be able to develop to really create strong policy development. And I'm going to have Gretchen Williams jump in for the next couple slides so that she can go a little bit deeper around each of those areas.
Hi, everyone. So in terms of coordination and alignment, like Sarah said, California implemented a very unique approach with their Early Learning Challenge grant. We have 17 participating consortia in 16 counties in California. And the directive from our governor was local control. So because we have that kind of approach to our QRIS, we have our local partners who are actually administering the QRIS at the local level. They are using varied data systems to collect information at the local level. And so we really wanted to work with them to make sure that what they're collecting was comparable across consortia, and then at the statewide level that we would be able to roll up and report data uniformly. This need for common data elements is so crucial for, building support for our QRIS and documenting outcomes down the road. And then we've also used this data in terms of our performance reporting with the Early Learning Challenge grant requirements. We're doing a lot of providing a lot of information about what's happening at the local level. So again, at the federal level, we want to provide consistent, aligned data that's also aligned across states. Like Sarah said, we have a lot of cross-sector work with other agencies in California. The Proposition 10 funded projects, they're aligned through First 5 California and 58 county commissions. We're also working with some other agencies and programs like the California Home Visiting Program, the Department of Developmental Services and their Early Start partners, the Department of Social Services and their Office of Child Abuse and Prevention, and also Project Launch. So we're really hoping to be able to coordinate all of our data and talk about things commonly. And then lastly, we just really we want to report data and message evaluation results to our legislature, our foundations, and the business sector to gain support. Okay, next slide on evaluation. So again, we had 17 consortia, so we're really hoping to report all of our data uniformly aligned to federal evaluation efforts and across other initiatives. I think that the First 5 California Child Signature Program is their preschool program that they're rolling out and administering currently. If we can align to those programs and those other investments, we're really going to be able to document long-term outcomes for children's school readiness and healthy development outcomes in California. And really, we want to use resources like this to not develop data collection or data cleaning processes that, you know, take time and effort. We really want to use the precious funds that we have in developing best practices and documenting child outcomes. Then lastly, on policy development, I think this data is going to support our state in developing policy for early learning programs and improved quality efforts, you know, documenting what works, what doesn't work, and where these investments can be made to kind of further early learning for our children. You know, we're really excited to be able to report data across state, you know, within our state, but who are we serving, what programs are participating, what is the background of our QRES workforce, things like that. What kinds of education and training are they engaged in or have they had coming into the program? Parent engagement. I mean, there's so many things that these data elements are going to help us, you know, the larger conversation.
So I think that's it for California. As you can see, we're basically in the needs stage, and our need for coordinating and aligning so that we have strong evaluation results so that we can use those results to develop policy is key, and is why we've been begging both the Office of, I think we've been talking to Eva Leaf multiple times, we've been begging Child Trends, everyone, for these kinds of documents. So we're just really grateful that they're now available.
Thank you so much, Sarah. This is Catherine, and thank you, Sarah and Gretchen, for talking about the experiences from California, and thank you, Kathleen, for sharing the wonderful system that you're working on in Vermont. And Sarah, you're exactly right. We were interested in providing some examples of states that are at different stages of development in early childhood or early care and education data systems. And we know that there are differences, of course, in the size and scope of data efforts in each state, and that your processes are going to evolve in different ways, just like they will evolve differently in different states beyond Vermont and California. So we wanted to show that despite the differences in where you may be, if you're in a state or if you're working with states, if you're a technical assistance provider, or you're an evaluator in a state, we wanted to show that despite differences in where states may be in the stage, that we think the data tools can be applicable at these different stages. So for example, in the early stages of development, the guidance on planning and the questions that you think about will provide a critical starting point. What do you need to know in your state to inform policy, monitoring, and reporting? Which questions are your highest priorities? And as was mentioned, the documents that we've created really are a starting point. We do not intend for them to be exhaustive. We hope that we can create more questions over time. And we did have a really important question that came through on the questions. And I want to encourage you, if you haven't already, to ask questions using the question box on the GoToWebinar screen. And the question was about how we're going to align our policy, research, and monitoring questions with those that are already available on the Connect tool. It's on the Common Education Data Standards website. And it's a fantastic tool where there are questions that are uploaded, and just as we described in the tool that we have, on the SEDS tool, they provide the policy question as well as data elements. And we expect that we will be sharing our tools with Connect, and that hopefully our tools can be uploaded directly into the Connect site. So we really are hoping to see that direct correspondence with the Connect site, because we know that's a place where many people will start as their starting point into this work, but we'll also have our tools available on Research Connection. So we do intend to be fully coordinated with that Connect tool in the questions component, and then the linking with data elements. So okay, so that's the first stage, the stage of the questions. And then we know that there's this next stage of, once you outline the questions, you're moving to this process of coordinating and mapping the recommended data elements with data you might already have available, or as Kathleen pointed out, finding those data gaps in your system. So she provided a helpful example, but again, we know that there may be a variety of options depending on the size and scope of the mapping that needs to occur, and we hope that the tool can provide one source of information that could guide that process. For states that are in the later stages of development, where you may already be implementing, you may be linking across different data systems, or really have some integrated components of your systems, we think that the tools can be used to compare the work that you've done, especially given their connections to the Common Education data standards. If that's not a tool that you've already accessed, these tools will be able to provide that linkage, and as we mentioned, to identify any gaps in your systems. And we know that in some states, as Vermont was an example, you will probably have already gone way beyond the recommendations. You may be including elements beyond just the quality elements or some of the early learning elements, and you may have included other systems. And we'll be really looking forward to hearing from you about how those, what some of those other pieces are that may be eventually added to the INQUIRE data tools, and also how the tools can be supportive to you using different models of technical assistance. And as we learn more about how states and technical assistance providers, researchers, and other stakeholders are accessing and using the data tools, we plan to share out that information again and provide updates to the materials. So next slide. So our next steps, within the next month, the tools will be available to you on the Research Connections website. You've provided your email to us as part of the registration, thankfully, because then we were also able to update you about how to reconnect to the webinar when it got disconnected. But we can use that address to send out a notice when the tools are available live on Research Connections. And note that there, Evelise at the beginning of our webinar mentioned that INQUIRE has been doing work across a number of different areas. Data is just one of those pieces. So if you go to Research Connections, within the next week or so, there will be a tab there that says INQUIRE. You can already find all the INQUIRE materials on Research Connections, but soon there will be one single stop, an INQUIRE tab that you can link to show all of the other products, not just our data products, but other products that we have related to quality rating improvement systems, evaluation of quality initiatives and QRIS, and a variety of other tools to support your work. So then I also wanted to invite you as well to 2 additional webinars that will build on the work we presented today. So on May 6th, we will present information about developing data governance structures, really using the lens of a quality rating and improvement system, since we know that many of you have come to this webinar, come to our work through that perspective of the QRIS. And as we mentioned earlier, work on QRIS in different states has really been motivating this, so we thought it would be particularly helpful to talk about data governance using that perspective. And I think that works well because we know that in many states, QRIS is intended to be a hub of information from a variety of different early childhood agencies and organizations, and thus it really is a hub of data from many sources. So we think that talking about governance, especially in that context, will be helpful for you. Then on May 16th, we will have our third webinar, which will be on best practices for producing high-quality data. And again, we'll approach this topic using the lens of QRIS because of the importance of high-quality data for producing ratings that have integrity in your system and that you can trust to be providing the information to parents and to stakeholders and to programs that you are intending. So we plan, as we hope this one was, we plan for both the webinars to be very practical and to include examples from states, as we did today, to ground the data issues in the reality of the work that many of you are doing. And the webinar also, a number of you asked in the questions, will this be recorded? And yes, it will be recorded, and that webinar recording will also be available on Research Connections. Again, we'll send a link to that recording. And then the next slide, I just want to acknowledge the variety of individuals who have contributed to this work. I know we mentioned earlier that we have been doing this work in partnership with many organizations, but I wanted to also make sure that you saw a list of some of the individuals who've been really critical to this work. They have contributed not only the development of specific data elements or questions, or they also gave us some advice about the process that could be used and shared with different stakeholders. And again, we expect this list to continue growing. We're looking forward to this webinar really being a point of connection to many of you who we may not have already connected with, and are looking forward to more opportunities to connect with you about this data work. And also just want to say thank you for the contributions that all of the folks on this slide have made to this work. So I'd like to take a bit of our remaining few minutes here to talk about some questions that we've received from you all in the audience. And if for those that we aren't able to address in this time, we'll provide written responses to any of those questions. Kathleen, we did receive a couple of questions about Vermont, and so I just want to address those to you. There were especially some questions about the cost. In fact, I believe that was the theme of a few of these questions about how expensive is it to develop a tool like the Building Bright Futures? Was it state or contractor designed? And I guess that's the key question. And then, the other one, I'm sorry. The other one is, are the data actually available on that website, or do they just provide links and show you where you could get further information, but not actual links to the data? If you could talk about any of those, Kathleen, it seems like it would be helpful to provide a little bit more information about the work in Vermont.
Sure. Thank you, Catherine. I guess the last question is the easiest. The data that is available on the site, so they don't have to go elsewhere to get the data. It's all there on the site. We do provide links to research or further analysis or further sort of efforts that are similar. Our design is attempting to not just provide data, but connect people around the state who are doing similar sort of work but may not know each other. So that's the answer to that one. That was the easy one. The cost is a much harder one. What we've tried to do, because we were not successful in the race for the top Early Learning Challenge grant on the first go-around or the second, and so what we decided to do, we stopped for a bit and said, we know what we want to do. It will cost too much to build the whole thing out. Let's go after a prototyping model, a business model where we're prototyping, and that prototype can use real data, real functionality, and engage potential funders to help us build it out even further. So we're finishing up our prototype with real data and building out some of those functions by the end of June. We've been successful to have some Building Bright Futures funding through ARA has supported some of the work. We've also, the Executive Director, Julie Coffey, has received, the state has received a project launch, and we have a little bit of money in there. So I'm talking about those little pots of money are, you know, in the Julie's not on the line, but around $150,000. So we've tried to have little pockets of money like that to keep us going. We do know in July 1 we need to secure additional funding to build it out further. So we're taking it one stage at a time, a step at a time. We will be ready to go scale up in July, but we do need funding to do that. And scale up, we've realized we don't need millions and millions of dollars to do this. What we really need is some solid funding over a year or two, and even more importantly, as important as the funding is that we really need the support from data stewards and data owners to share their data. So we have that's our two big next steps, is to secure funding and to continue to get data sharing agreements with key state entities. So that's a cost, and although not a dollar cost. So that's a little roundabout, Catherine, but we can provide more details. And we're definitely funding is not, there's not a lot of funding sources out there that are ready to step in and support this sort of effort in a big way. So we've tried to do, again, that prototyping approach where people can, public, private funders can feel, breathe, see how it would be meaningful to them and helpful to them, and hopefully that garners some investment. So we're getting some bites. So we hope in July 1 we have a new investor for the next year.
Thank you, Kathleen. Just a second question is about how will the tools be updated, if at all? And Evelise, can you take this one?
Sure. I think that from the beginning, when we started this project about a year ago, we felt that some of this work it's a moving target, and that these data tools will be products that are in progress. So I think at OPRE we feel that through INQUIRE we will continue to review other initiatives that are in the process of developing common data elements for the purposes of research, evaluation, reporting, and accountability. And we will expand and revise the tools as needed, always taking into account, how the importance of aligning to other national efforts so that we are all speaking the same language, and we are going towards some core elements in early childhood that will help us understand what's happening across the nation and in the states in particular. So the elements that will be available next month are centered on the topics related to quality of programs, quality enhancement, QIRS. But the data elements team has also been working on data elements related to other pieces in the early childhood system, such as child care subsidy administration, parent engagement, and other topics that will continually be added to these tools and that cut across early childhood programs. And we will add those elements to the dictionary, the matrix, as well as developing new policy questions that can be used by the stakeholders. So I think that our current thinking is that the tools will be updated maybe twice a year so that we can respond to the data needs that may surface, as we go forward. So that's our current thinking. So I hope that that will be responsive to the needs of states, data users, and other stakeholders.
Great, thank you, Evelise. I also had a comment that was made that is prompting me to just remind or to note yet another partner and another really important group to be aware of. There's a new center that's funded by OSEP, and it's called the DAISY Center. And it's a very new center, but they will be working with states, particularly around data on special education, but they're very interested in connecting more broadly to the other data system efforts that are involved. And we have briefly spoken with them, and we're really excited to be partnering with them as well. We'll make sure in the materials that we send following the webinar to send a link to the website for that new center that is being led by SRI with a number of other partners, and including including partnership with AEM and Missy Kokener, who's working on the CEDS. So there's lots of other connections, and we'll continue to make those connections. We also, speaking of connections, had a request to send the website link to the Connect tool that the Common Education Data Standards has, and we will make sure to include that in our email as well. So I think with that, we will make sure to send any responses to the other questions that we've received. We'll make sure to respond to those via email, and we really appreciate your questions. I know many of you have specific questions about some of the data elements that you saw flash upon the screen, and we were really trying to give you more of a drive-by view of some of these. We know we have many of them, and we wanted to give you a flavor. But of course, we know you have many questions about the details of those, and we look forward to being able to field some of those questions, especially once the tools are live and available for you. But again, as you've heard and as Ivelisse mentioned, we do think of this really as the first step in a long-term process of developing supports and guidance on issues related to data and data system building. So we really do look forward to your continued input. I've appreciated already the many emails that have come just during this presentation and some of the questions on the chat offering to make connections, and we're looking forward to doing that. As I mentioned early on, and I want to mention again, we really want to enhance the already fantastic work that's going on in the field. We don't intend to duplicate or redo things that have been done. We're really hoping to just enhance efforts and work as partners with others of you who are already involved in this work. So Meg, if you could go to the last slide. We have our emails here. This presentation, the PowerPoint will also be available along with the recording. So you'll have our emails available there, but our emails are here as well. And I guess just on behalf of our colleagues at Child Trends, I'd like to say thank you so much for your participation in this webinar. We really appreciate you hanging in there after the worst possible nightmare of a webinar, disconnecting from it. But you all were hung in, and it's just so happy that you were able to remain with us for the rest of the webinar. And so thank you. And then I'll turn it over to Ivelisse Martinez-Beck from OPRE for a few closing words.
Thank you, Catherine. Well, I hope that this will be useful for your work, and that OPRE, through INQUIRE, will continue to identify research-based resources that can help in your work, especially when it relates to accountability, research evaluation of the programs that you're putting in place. So thank you again, and we hope to talk to you again in May for the second